Welcome everyone. I want to thank you for joining this live stream. I'm going to be hosting this on my own. My name is Jonathan Gonzalez, and today we're going to be going over using the timeline. I want to go over a kind of like an overview of what the timeline is and what it's currently being used for. So Unity has been using the timeline as a way to kind of, I guess, make Unity more of a film tool. So there have been a few short films that have been created using the timeline tool, and there is going to be some new tools being introduced into Unity later down the line. Oh, sorry. A little later down the line, like Cinemachine and I believe Octane Renderer is also a standalone engine as well, but that's going to be introduced later on. It may be something that we're going to be looking at later on in the live stream series, not in this particular live stream, but later on in different live streams. So I want to post a few links in the chat for videos that have been created using these new tools. So this first one is going to be a link that actually Unity themselves have sent out today by email, and it was actually kind of timely because it goes over the behind the scenes of the Atom shorts. The Atom shorts are kind of like short videos that were created, or short films that were created by a studio called Ode Studios, which was created by Neil Blomkamp. He's the guy behind Chappie. He's behind District 9. There's a few other movies that I just can't remember what they are at the moment. But he created these short films with Unity. So I'll be providing a link to that here. Okay, so that first link is behind the scenes. It's a very short video of a behind the scenes of how they use the timeline with the Atom shorts. I'll be providing a link to the Unity YouTube channel and the Atom video as well. This is episode 3 of Atom. And then lastly, I'm going to be posting the actual YouTube channel itself. Okay, so when you guys have time, there's a total of 3. There might be a 4th Atom video, but there's a total of 3 short films, or I believe they're about 10 minutes each, and they were all made within Unity. They were made using the Unity timeline tool. I believe they also use Cinemachine and a few other custom tools, custom shaders, things of that sort. But these were made for Unity by Unity with the help of Neil Blomkamp. So I do highly recommend watching these, and you can see the power of Unity behind these films. So we're going to be going over the basics of using timeline, and timeline is going to be useful for, I think of it as a video editing tool for different types of events in the games. So we're going to jump into Unity, and we're going to take a look at the basics of using this tool. Okay, so once again, I am going to be solo. If you have any questions on how to use anything within Unity within reason that I can teach right now, or anything about the timeline or anything of that sort, feel free to leave it in the chat. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between Unity and looking at the chat. So here we are in Unity, and I do have this special asset that I purchased off the asset store. I thought this would be a nice asset to use as an environment background. And for this live stream, all we're going to be doing is moving a few cameras around to kind of create this cinematic feel where we have cameras zooming in and out in different parts of the level. So we're also going to be using some audio, so we're going to turn this audio on at a particular time within the timeline. Now we'll get started by first opening up the timeline window. So I'm going to go to Window, Timeline. And right now this is going to start off as kind of a bigger window, so I want to change my layout to make this easier to work with. I'm going to switch this layout to a tall layout. So we have the hierarchy up here, the project panel down here. I don't like having these icons off to the right here, so I'm going to switch this to a 1-column layout. And now I'm going to open up my timeline once again. So once again, that's Window, and then Timeline. And I'm just going to dock this down below. So now I get to see everything within my scene up here. We're also going to see the game window right next to that. and I can then use my timeline down below. Now the timeline is going to work very similar to, say, a video editor or an animation tool for Unity, but we can also use this for a multitude of different uses beyond what we would do within animations. So if we want to have, say, a camera just zoom in and out through our level here, we could do that with animations. But what if we want to have, say, a particle system effect happen or turn on at a specific event within that animation, or maybe we want to have some audio play at this time or something of that sort? Well, doing that through animations is possible, but you would have to do a lot more scripting, a lot more timing of things to get just right, and it would just be very, very tedious. So the timeline tool makes it very easy to be able to control all of that, similarly to how we would control, say, placing video clips within a short film that we're creating within a video editor. So we're starting off with the timeline down here. You can see it says to start creating a timeline, select a game object. Now I'm going to be creating an empty game object first, and this is going to essentially hold everything that we need for the timeline itself. So I'll create an empty game object. We'll call this timeline manager. Okay, just checking chat real quick, make sure there's no questions, pending questions, or anything of that sort. Okay, so our timeline manager has been created. All we're going to do is actually create a director component, and this is going to create a timeline asset for us as well. We could also create this for any specific game object, but since we want to interact or essentially affect different types of game objects, we're going to have one empty game object which will control everything for that. It also makes it very easy to be able to find this within our hierarchy. So I'm going to click on create, and when we first create this, it's going to add the name of the actual game object along with timeline at the very end. This doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, timeline manager timeline, so I'm just going to remove that ending section. Okay, and I'm going to save this as a playable and click on save. Now when I do that, we can see we now get some information in here in our timeline manager, and we also get an animator and a playable director. Now the playable director is going to have a few different things in here. First off, we did create the timeline manager asset, and now we have the update method. For the demonstration purposes of this live stream, we're just going to stick with this having play on awake checked on. If you want to, say, have this activated through a script, you can then uncheck this, and then you could just, say, call this to play at a specific time. Maybe you walk into a trigger zone, or maybe something happens within your game where then a series of events happens. So we're going to leave this checked on for now. All we're going to have is a couple of cameras moving around within our environment. So let's just go through some of these things in here. We're not going to be adjusting all of these, but at the very top we have update method. Now the update method is currently set to game time. We could also switch this to a custom manual time. We can use unscaled game time, and we can also use DSP clock. Play on awake basically just means that once we start our game, when I click on play, it's automatically going to start this timeline sequence. We have wrap mode, currently set to none. We can have this set to hold, so it's going to hold a specific position, or we can also have it looping over and over again. So if we want to have our cameras going through our level and we want this sequence to happen over and over again, we would have looping set up. Down below that, we have our bindings. Now the bindings are really going to be our tracks. So right now we have one track, and we're going to be going over this in a moment, but I just want to go over this right now. We have bindings, so each one of these tracks is going to be shown up right here underneath bindings. So everything that we have within our timeline manager is also going to appear right here. Okay, so that's the playable director, and we'll be going more in depth with this in subsequent live streams as we get more into customization of this. Okay, so when we start off, we're going to have our timeline manager in here. We're not going to be doing anything with the timeline manager. This is just essentially an empty game object that's going to hold our timeline. So I'm going to remove this. I'm just going to right click on it and go down to delete. Okay, so we don't have any tracks anymore. Now before we add anything else, I want to kind of briefly go over how this works. Now if you're familiar with the animation window in Unity, a lot of this is going to be very similar. So we have preview currently checked on. We have a couple of tools here to basically play our timeline. So if we want to play the entire sequence, we can do that through these tools. We can step through, we can go to the very end, or we can go to the very beginning of our timeline. We have the current frame or the current time within our timeline. And then we have this right here, the timeline manager itself. Let's add in a couple of tracks. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to control a camera. I want to start off with my main camera, which is right here. So if I left click on it, this is what our camera is currently looking at. And what I want to do with this camera is I want to have this camera just pan through and go through this hallway right about here. Now, once it reaches that point, I then want to go to a second camera. I want to enable a second camera and have that go through a different part of our environment. So we're going to be going over how we can animate both these cameras, but also how we can activate a secondary camera as well. So I'm going to add in a new track. I'm going to go back to my timeline manager. And I'm going to click on add right here. Now when I click on add, we're going to get a number of different tracks and a group. So at the very top, we have a track group. Now track group is essentially going to allow us to group together different types of tracks. So we want to keep things nice and organized, kind of like in a folder. We would group these all within a specific track group. Now this is going to make a bit more sense when we have a lot of different tracks in here. For now, we're just going to have a few of them, so we're not going to worry about using a track group quite yet. We'll start off with a animation track. So with our animation track, this will allow us to actually record an animation of our camera. And we're going to start off by adding in an animator component to our camera. Now we need an animator because we are going to be creating an animation within the timeline manager. So we need to have an animator to be able to actually control that type of animation. So I'm going to select my main camera, which in this case we just have one. And I do have an animator already applied. So now I can drag that into my timeline. So once again, if you don't have an animator applied, you can just go to add components, type in animator, and you can see it's right here. Okay, by default, there is no animator applied. That was just included as something that I was testing before. So I do have an animator already applied to my camera. Okay, so I'm going to drag that camera into this slot. It's going to be looking for a animator component. So if we don't have one in there, it's not going to allow us to drag it into that slot. Okay, I'm going to drag this to the very front right here. Now, before we go into any kind of animation creation, I want to go over the timeline itself. So to navigate around here, you can scroll in and out. This is going to be important if you want to take a look at the time from a certain increment. So in this case, we could see it in 5-second increments right here. You can also scroll in if you want to get a bit more granular with this. If you want to go to the very top, for some reason there isn't any kind of like scroll bar down here, which I'm not really a big fan of. But if you want to go to the very beginning, you want to click on this button right here. It'll take you to the very beginning. You can also go to the very end as well. So let's also take a look at how we can modify this. So right now it's currently set to use seconds. This first number right here is the second mark. If I scroll in a bit, you can see it starts turning into 130. This second number right here is the frames. So right now we're using 60 frames per second. So how do I know this? Well, if we click on the gear icon over here, you can see it's currently set up to seconds. By default, it's set to frames. Now, this frames right here doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for me because I want to be able to time things, and I don't really like using frames for that. So I can change this to seconds, and it makes a bit more sense for me. I know this is at 4 seconds. I know this is at 4.5 seconds. Now, if you want to change the frame rate, you can go down here. By default, it's going to be set to 60. So you can also set this to 30 or 50, whatever you want to choose within here. Okay, so I'm using seconds, and the frame rate is going to be 60. Now let's take a look at how we can animate our camera. So what I want to do, let's just switch back to our scene view real quick. I want to have this camera go through this hallway right here and stop right about here. And basically what I'm trying to recreate is kind of like an intro scene to a level. Sometimes in games you would have it set up so that the level would be showcased through various camera angles and various camera animations. So that's what we're going to be doing here. We're going to have this camera go down this hallway, stop right about here, and then once it gets to this point, we're then going to activate a second camera, which will be placed over here. And then that camera, actually the camera is going to be right about here. That camera is going to be pulled out. So it's going to be going down the hallway backwards. Now we can keep repeating this process over and over, but we're just going to be demonstrating how this works with the timeline. So we're just going to have a few of these. Then we're also going to be adding in some audio. We're going to have some music in the background as well. So we'll start off with our first camera. And in this environment, the camera set up with a -75 for the y-axis rotation. I'm just going to zero that out to 0. Okay. And what I'm going to do is, over time, we're going to rotate this 90 degrees to look down this hallway. And then we're going to have it go down that hallway. So let's go back to our timeline manager. And with the camera track selected, I'm going to click on the record button right here. So once again, very similar to how we will do this within the animation window. So click record. It's now going to start blinking. And you can see it says recording right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this camera. I'm going to turn the camera to face down this hallway. So this should be a -90. That's going to be our starting rotation. Okay, so we see a keyframe here. It's a little bit hard to see, but you can see we have a keyframe right here. I'm going to jump down to, say, the 5-second mark. So I'm using my scroll wheel to kind of zoom in and crunch this up a bit. And this is at 5:01. Okay, there we go, right at 5. So now I'm going to add in a second keyframe, and that second keyframe is going to have the camera moving forward towards the door frame right here. And we can see what the camera is actually looking at right here. So if I need to move this off to the side a bit, I can, and easily see this from the camera preview. Okay, so I'll stop this right about here or so. Okay, and I can scrub through this as well. And it doesn't look like it recorded the position initially. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the first keyframe. Just move this back to where it was. Okay, there we go. Okay, so at the 5-second mark, we're going to be in this door frame right here. And then I want to move it to right about here. So we'll move this out to the 10-second mark. And I'll push this through all the way until we get to this, I guess, a desk, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so we can scrub through this. And if I want to play this in its entirety, I can click on the play button here. Now, I'll go into my game view so we can see what this is actually going to look like. So if I hit play, you can see it starts zooming in through that hallway. Okay, so once you're done with that, you can see it still says it's recording. I'm going to click on the record button once again to stop that, and now I have an animation ready for that camera. Now, what if we want to change the keyframes? Maybe I want to make this longer, or maybe I want to adjust the rotation, or something of that sort. Now, if I did want to make small changes based off the current keyframes, I can go back and click record, and then I can go down to, say, this keyframe, and then maybe adjust the position or the rotation. But what if I want to move the actual keyframes around? Well, we can't do that from here. We could actually do it from the curves. So I do have the curve selected, which is this little icon right here. But we can also go into the animation window itself to make these changes. Now, I prefer working with the animation window. It's just a bit simpler overall. So to do that, you can either double click on the track, or you can left click on this stack of lines, and you can go to Edit in Animation Window. Okay, so from here, this is the animation clip for the camera. There's a question from Anne, says, I think you lost your initial rotation. So the starting keyframe was at 90 degrees. I did rotate it. So when you have your starting keyframe, that's where the animation is going to start from. I know the initial rotation of the camera is facing off to the right. I could have that set up like that, where it actually rotates 90 degrees to start off. I'll just have to set that up as the first keyframe, which I didn't. So going back into the animation window, if, say, I want to make this a little bit longer, I could then take these keyframes right here, maybe push them out to, say, 20 seconds. So I'll leave this second keyframe right here at 10, and then I can push this one out to 20 seconds. And then when I'm done with that, I can just jump back into the timeline, and you can see that has been updated as well. Okay, that's a little bit too slow, so I'm going to go back to where it was before. I believe this, yeah, that was at 15. And that first part is, I'll make this even. So I'll put 5 seconds in between both. Yeah, that should be good. So I think that's a good time for our first camera. Okay, so once this camera reaches this point right here, I then want to activate a second camera. So once it gets to about this point, I then want to start a second camera. So we're going to be enabling a second camera, which is also going to have its own animation as well. So to do that, we'll start off by first creating a duplicate of our camera. I'll right click on this. We'll go down to duplicate. And I'll name this hall camera. And I'll jump back into my scene view real quick. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be placing this camera in this hallway. So I'm just going to manually move this over there. I'm going to press F to zoom in on it. Okay, I'm going to push it back a bit. Okay, right about here should be good. Okay, so this is going to be our secondary camera, and we're going to enable this once the first camera has finished playing its animation. So we'll jump back to the timeline manager, and note that the hall camera does have everything that the main camera already has. So we do have an animator for this as well. So we can just then animate this second camera as well. Okay, so let's add in a second track. This is going to be an activation track. So we have an activation track here, which is going to allow us to enable or disable different types of game objects within our timeline. So this is just looking for a game object. It's not looking for any other type of specific component. So I can add anything in here, and then I can move this around. So this is why I think of this as kind of like a video editor, because you could use these as, if you've ever used something like Adobe Premiere or any type of video editor, you'd have these video tracks, and then you can move them around. Maybe you want to have one video track here and then another down here, or you could have different tracks for things like audio or images or things of that sort. Well, we can do something very similar for the timeline. So here I can specify that I want to have this secondary game object enabled at the 10-second mark. Now I'm going to set up my hall cameras at. So once I add that in here, you can see that while we're over here, that camera is turned off. Once I move it into the 10-second mark and above, it now enables that camera. Okay, and you can kind of see that symbol right here also turning on and off. So we're going to have this active between 10 seconds and 15 seconds. I'm going to increase that to 20 seconds, right? Now we're just enabling and disabling that camera at that point. So if I go back into my game view and I click on play, we're going to play the first animation. Okay, the second camera is still disabled. And then we're going to be switching to our second camera. Now there's no animation on this second camera, so it's just going to stay active for that entire time. Now with an activation track, if I left click on this, we also have a few other options. So post playback state, I can set this to inactive. Now what this is going to do is after we're done playing through this entire sequence right here, it's then going to deactivate that same game object. So if we scrub through this, I don't know if it'll work if we scrub through it, and it does. As you can see here, if we're outside of this active zone, it's disabled. Once we go through this, it's enabled. Then once again, once we get out of that, it's disabled once again. I'm going to go ahead and set this back up to leave as is. And I also want to animate this camera as well. So we want to have that camera going down the hallway backwards. Okay, so I'm going to add in another animation track as before. So let's go ahead and add in an animation track. We're going to add in our hall camera. And you'll notice that as I try to add this in, it's not going to allow me to animate this when it's not active. So in order to animate this, I need to go into the active section, and then you can see that is now enabled. So I can click on this, then start the animation process. So I'll move this directly at 10. There we go. Okay, so the starting keyframe, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my scene view. I'm going to move this down just a bit, just to add that first keyframe. And I'm doing that because if you add any type of movement or any type of change from its original orientation or position, it's then going to detect that as a movement, and it's going to add in a keyframe for you. So if you want to use that original position, you can move it slightly and then return it back to its original position. In my case, I'm not going to worry about that too much, so I'm going to leave that as is. Now, all we're going to be doing is we're going to be going down this hallway. So I want to go all the way down to this section right here. Now, once we get to that section, we can then say, play an audio clip of music. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to jump down to the end section right here where it's active, which should be exactly at 20. And I'll move it all the way down to hallway. And it doesn't look like it recorded it. Try this once again. Oh, because I think I'm slightly outside of where it should be. I'll just move this out a bit. I guess not. Not sure why it didn't move for that second keyframe, but I'll move it now. Okay, it looks like it's working now. There we go. I'll just preview this from this section here. Okay, I think that looks good right there. So once again, I'll preview this from the game window. So we should see both of these playing simultaneously, one after the other. I'm going to make sure that I save this, so I'm going to click the record button once again, making sure I'm within the active area. We'll hit play. Okay, and there we go. So that second camera started playing right after the first camera, and now we're taking a look at a different part of our environment. Now let's take a look at how we can do this with audio as well. So we don't have any audio currently playing. Let's go and add in a audio track. I do have an audio clip here. So this is just a simple audio of Spaceship Bridge. This is an asset I purchased as well that contain a bunch of different types of like sci-fi audio clips. Let's go and play this audio clip. It's not going to be fading in or out or anything of that sort, but we just want to go over how this works with audio as well. So we're going to add in a audio track. So we'll go down to audio track. Okay, it's going to be looking for an audio source. So we need something to actually play the audio clip. I'm just going to create an empty game object for that. And I'll call this audio. We need to add an audio source. And I'm going to drag in my audio clip into the audio clip slot. Now, I don't want to have play on awake checked on. This should work with the timeline itself. So we're going to enable this at a specific time. And I'm not sure if we need to have anything else in here changed. We could change the 2D to 3D, but I'll leave it at 2D for now, just so we can hear this clearly. Let's go back to our timeline manager. I'll drag in the audio. Okay, there we go. And I believe I can actually drag in the audio itself as well. So I think I'll just do that. I'll just drag in the audio clip itself because then I can move this around. So I'm just going to remove this guy right here and just use the audio clip directly. Now the audio clip might be a little loud. I'll go ahead and turn that down in the live stream. But we're going to have this audio clip playing right at the end of that second camera. So let me scroll out a bit. What I'll do is just shorten this down to about, I believe that's 5 seconds. That should be good right there. I'm going to turn on my desktop audio for you guys. And I'll have this relatively low. Now for the audio, we can't actually preview this from the preview window. We have to actually play this. Okay, so I'm not sure if you guys can hear the actual audio itself. I'm not sure if you can actually hear the audio itself, but the audio is coming through right about here. So there's a question about the ease in and ease out for the animations. You can do that with animations. I'm not entirely sure if they are default or not. I know there is an option to set that in. It's something that I would have to take a look at a little bit further. I haven't used that a whole lot, so I'm not entirely sure if it is a default feature. Okay, so we have our two animations. We have a camera that is being activated at the 10-second mark with a secondary animation playing. And then at the very end, we have our audio playing as well. Now, you could also have audio effects happening. So maybe if we walk through a specific part of our environment, we could have some sort of very short sound effect happening at that specific point. So if you had, say, characters talking to each other, you could have the camera looking at one character and then the camera looking at another character, and you can sync together the animations and the audio clips and things of that sort. So let's play around with this a bit more, and let's add in one more camera. So we'll just add in a camera. So that's going down that hallway. What we can do is we can have a number of different cameras going down this way. So it's going to be rotating around this tube and down this way as well. Maybe back to the beginning. And then we can have this looping over and over again. So I'll call this tube camera. And I'm going to place this down over here. And I just lost that camera. Zoom in on it. It's facing the opposite direction that I want. Okay, so I'm going to add this in after this second camera as well. So we're going to have these cameras, it's basically going back to back. So let's add this in as well as I believe we can try this as an animation track. I know with animations, you can enable and disable game objects through animation as well. So we'll give that a quick try. Okay, so I want this starting off right after this second camera, and we're also going to have the audio playing as that third camera is then going through our tube. So I'll extend this out a bit. It's not letting me animate this. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because of the audio. That's interesting. I'm gonna go ahead and re-add this. I'm not sure why it's not letting me add the animation or create the animation. I should say. Maybe possibly because there's two different cameras. Let me take a look at this again. I'm gonna add in a activation track here. I'll place this right here. I'll move this one down below it. So I'm going to activate that third camera, and then we're going to play the animation for that. It still doesn't let me play that animation or animate that camera. I'm not sure why. That's interesting. I'm going to go ahead and put these into a group. So I'm going to create a track group. Just drag them in here. Then I'll create a new track group. I'll just rename this one so you can't rename it from over there. Another thing that I don't really like about this. So I'll set this up as second camera or third camera. And this will be first cameras. And then from here, we can add additional tracks to this as well. So I'm going to try to add that same animation track for the camera. It just doesn't allow me to animate this. I'm not entirely sure why. That's frustrating. Let's see. It's not even working as intended with the activation group either. Well, I suppose we'll leave out that third camera, but we have our two cameras in there and our audio. And if we take a look at some of the other tracks in here, these are some of the tracks that we're going to be looking at in the next live stream. We have a control track and a playable track. Now, both of these are going to work kind of more for customization. So the control track is going to be used for controlling time. So if we had, say, a particle system within here and we want to control the time of that particle system, maybe the mission or how long it takes to actually activate, we can use a control track. And then we also have the playable track, which is going to be used for controlling multiple timelines. So maybe you want to have one specific timeline for cameras, you want one for character animations, then you want one for effects. You can control all of those using a playable track, but for that, that's going to require a custom C# script to be able to control all of that. And we're going to get into that in the second live stream. So we'll go over how we can use, say, trigger zones with a C# script. So maybe we have a player walk into a specific part, and then that starts a cutscene sequence or something of that sort. Now, if you guys have any questions about the timeline, let me know. Or if you have questions about animation in general, let me know as well. Now, since we can't get the camera to work, what I might do is just add in some text right above. So when we start our game, we'll have some text kind of fading in, kind of like an intro sequence to a game. So I'll create a UI element for this, and then we'll have this activated at the very beginning, but we'll have it fade in with an animation. So I'm going to place this right about here or so. Add some text. This should show up as a screen space overlay. So this is our text. I'm going to disable that hall camera for now. And it's a little bit hard to see right now, but I'll make adjustments to the size. And we could just say something like CG Cookie presents. We'll make this white. I'm going to increase the size of this. And we're going to animate this, having it fade in and fade out. Okay, so I'm going to add this into the timeline. I'm just going to go ahead and rename this to first sequence, just to make a bit more sense. And at the very beginning, I'm going to have this text element fade in and fade out. And hopefully this will work with this. I'll rename this to UI text. Okay, so I'm going to have an activation track. This will be our UI text. It doesn't look like it's added into that first group. There we go. So we'll have it active right about here, but I want to have this animated as well. And I'll have it active. Yeah, I think that's fine right there. And then once it goes to that second portion, we'll just have it fade out. So I'm going to add in an animation track for this. And I need to add in a animator to this. So we're going to go to add components, go down to animator. And now we can add that to our track. Okay, so I need to go into the text itself, and we should be able to do this from the color. So I'm just going to adjust the alpha, and hopefully this works with the animation. It should, as it does work with a traditional animation. And what we could do is keep this active to the very end and then have it fade out as well. So I want to keep this, let's see, we'll go with 10 seconds visible, and then it'll fade out at the very end for 5 seconds as well. Where's my text? So I'm just going to push this in and out, and you can see how it added a keyframe. So that way we can have 2 keyframes with the exact same alpha value. Hey Jesse, welcome. Appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to have this fade in. It appears for about 5 seconds, and then we want this to fade out as well. So let's see, that first section is between 5 and 20, and I want to keep this consistent. So that is 15 seconds. And then we have it staying visible for 10 seconds. And then 15 seconds after that, which would be at 45. So I'll extend it out to about here, and then we'll have that fade out. And it doesn't look like it took. Try this again. According to the curve, it is working properly, but I'm not sure why it's not fading out. That's weird. There we go. Not sure why that worked. Just moved it down slightly. Okay, we're done recording, so we can uncheck that. So I'll just kind of play this real quick. So we're then going to activate our UI text. It's going to fade in, and it's not fading in. There we go. It's fading in very, very slowly. So once again, we can adjust that timing within the animation window, which is what I'll do. So I'm going to go into the Edit in Animation window, and I'll just push these in closer. So I want this to fade in fairly quickly. Let's just make this 5 seconds. So 5 seconds for every part of that. So another set of keyframes. Let's just scroll through this. Okay, that's working as intended. Let's go back into our timeline. Play this once again. So we're going to activate that text. Have it fade in. It's going to stay visible for 5 seconds. And then it should start fading out for 5 seconds. And since the animation has been shortened down, we can also just bring this in as well. Okay, and I'll probably push this in as well. We'll just have the audio playing right after the first camera. Okay, so the first camera is right here. And that'll be the end of our sequence. I'm going to maximize this, and we'll give this a quick test. Okay, there we go. CG Cookie presents. Okay, there's the audio. It should be coming through. And it's fading out. Okay, then it just reverts back to whatever the camera is currently looking at. In this case, this is the first camera. This is where it stopped. Okay, so there we go. We have a very basic sequence that we created with the timeline. There are a number of different things that are probably a little bit buggy or not working as expected, but hopefully you guys understand how the timeline works. I think for the most part, it is pretty easy to understand if you're familiar with animation or video editing. As you can see here, there wasn't anything complex about it. We didn't go into any kind of coding or anything of that sort. It was just mostly moving things around, animating them, and things of that sort. So it's very easy to get started. And this is one of the reasons why it's so powerful for film development. This is not just for games. It can be used for any sort of short film development. So if you want to experience how to use Unity for films and you're not interested at all in games, you can use the timeline. We also have Cinemachine, which I'll be covering a little bit later down the line. Cinemachine is more for, I guess, camera movements. It does a lot of like camera tracking and panning and things of that sort. So we'll be using that in conjunction with the timeline. And also we'll probably be using Octane. I'm still experimenting with Octane, but it's basically a engine that allows us to create very realistic lighting. And I'm not sure if it's going to be too expensive to use for a live stream in terms of performance or time consumption. But if it's possible to teach that, I'll be teaching that as well later on down the line. Now, if you guys have any questions about the timeline from what we've taught so far, or animations or anything of that sort with Unity that we've covered so far, let me know in the comments. Yeah, and once again, take a look at those links that I posted in the chat. Atom was created with Unity. Obviously, it's a lot of custom work, but it is based on Unity, and they did use the timeline for controlling all of that. And it's a very powerful tool for enabling people to be able to create stuff like that with Unity very easily. All right, guys, if you guys don't have any other questions or any other comments that you'd like to leave, I'm going to be wrapping this up. That's just about everything that I wanted to cover in today's live stream. I just wanted to go over the basics of using timeline. It is very easy and simple to set up and start using right away. So play around with it, have fun with it, and I'll see you in the next live stream. That one's going to be a bit more complex. We are going to be looking at C# scripting and how we can control these different types of timelines through specific events that we want within our game. Again, once again, like triggers or anything of that sort where we have a player that activates some sort of event within our game. Yeah, I really enjoy using these tools. They're very fun to be able to actually use, and it's very easy to actually just jump in and start using these tools right away without having any kind of technical background with Unity or coding or anything of that sort. All right, thank you everyone for joining this live stream. I'll see you in the next live stream.